You can be seated. That everyone should admire Jeff's talit. He has one for every season, and I think this is a new one. Yeah, it's a new one. So for the talit, his kippah. So it is great. So as we're ending the secular New Year, the Gregorian year, there's much to talk about, right? How the Shabbat, it could have been a sort of a year in review of what happened in 2024. Not enough good things have happened in 2024. It feels like that, though there's always a lot of good things that happen. It just doesn't get reported on, right? But it is always important to remember that there is so much light in the world. There is so much good that happens every morning. Moda ani lefanacha. But that's not what I'm talking about today. But important to remember that there is always so much good. I could talk about Israel, but I've talked about that a lot. I could talk about so many things. And I said, you know what? It's going to be small today. We're going to spend time together. And I just wanted to delve deeply into the Parsha, right? Because sometimes when the world is too crazy, the answer really is Torah. The answer is just to read the Parsha, see what speaks to you, and to jump out. And so for this, I brought one pasuk, one verse, and we're just going to unpack this verse over time, because that's what I need sometimes, is to just remember the world is out there and the Torah is here, and it is rich and it is beautiful and it is amazing, and we are part of a conversation that spans centuries. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be part of this conversation. So, Parshat Miketz, here we are. Someone want to read in Hebrew this one pasuk, this one verse at the top of the page? You don't have to. What if you wanted? If you wanted to, okay, Chazan. Perfect. Thank you. This is actually not part of what we read today, but this is when Joseph is still in prison. He's still down in the prison. So someone want to read it in English? I just brought the verse 14 in the Hebrew, but verses 10 to 14. Would someone read that in English? Great, Roberta.
When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and placed me in custody in the house of the prefect, together with the chief baker. We had dreams the same night, he and I, each of us a dream with meaning of its own. A Hebrew youth was there with us, a servant of the prefect, and when we told him our dreams, he interpreted them for us, telling each of the meaning of his dream. And as he interpreted for us, so it came to pass. I was restored to my post, and the other was impaled. Thereupon Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was rushed from the dungeon. He had his hair cut and changed his clothes, and he appeared before Pharaoh.
Great, thank you. I wanted to give a little context to what our primary verse is going to be. It's an incredible verse because what I've highlighted here in the Hebrew, I just put it in larger font, or I underlined it in the English, is there are so many verbs. There's so much action that happens so quickly together. The idea, what are there, 5 verbs here? The idea is that it all must be very rushed. Right? I pointed out a different section of the Parsha, right, that we were reading today about that idea of being rushed. You know, I have to imagine this younger Joseph compared to what we read today, which was him many years later, right? This younger Joseph you're probably defined a little bit by the experiences that you have, especially traumatic experiences that you have as you get to be more of a grown-up. And this being thrown into prison or into the pit, the bore into the pit, had to be traumatic for him. So it makes sense that we see him echoing these actions later. But here, in this one verse, 5 verbs all stuck together, and that's what jumped out at me. that I want us to unpack a little bit more, right? So the way I laid out the sheet is that we're going to look at each one and see what the Jewish conversation has been like, and we're going to add to it. So the first one, Pharaoh sent. Right? Pharaoh called for him. There's actually two parts of it before we get into the text. What is the first word? Vayishlach. That's the name of one of the parshiot, right? Shlach lecha, right? To be sent. But then we don't even know. He sent someone, right? And then he called Joseph, right? Often, Vayikra is to be called in a big way, like by an important person. So Pharaoh is calling out to Joseph. Who do we normally hear that is doing the calling? Right. John just points up. Yeah, because God lives up, right? So God does not live up. God is not it's not by geography, but I got your message, right? So Pharaoh sends, someone is sent. And Joseph is called out to what we know by the end of the verse to come. So he hurries. So Sforno, 16th century. So now we're connecting the 21st century and the 16th century together. What does he say? A miraculous deliverance always transpires with haste. Whenever anything incredible happens, it always happens in a hurried way. So it was when the Israelites left Egypt. And so will it be when Israel is redeemed from the current exile, he is saying, right? It's going to happen quickly. Transformative change happens quickly in here. And so we know what happens to Joseph, how it plays out in the end. Sforno knows, and we know, because we've read the entirety of the Torah. And so, of course, this is hurried action, because it's redemptive action. Interesting that this redemptive action isn't being carried out by an Israelite. Who's the one that's calling Joseph out of the pit? Pharaoh, exactly. In the mind of the rabbis, Pharaoh is part of the entire scheme of the Jewish people. And so here he is the one that is doing the calling. And Sforno says that it's a redemptive, hurried action. And I think that there's also a sense of hopefulness in here, right? Embedded in Jewish texts is this sense of hopefulness. That the time that we are living in now, what he says is the current exile, Sforno says, right? That it could be dark. It could be seen as so negative in so many ways, but he inserts into this comment the sense of hopefulness, right? We in our time, today, he in his time in the 1500s, right? Or even all the way back to Joseph's time, that there is a redemptive quality that's going to happen quickly. So we wait for that. Well, let's go back a little bit earlier to the 14th century, the 1300s. Rabbeinu Bachia, he's in Muslim-controlled Spain, is where he is writing. So Bachia ibn Pakuda is his fuller name. Ibn is the Arabic sort of way, rather than Ben, what we do, for son of. Ibn is the Arabic version of that. Someone want to read this here at the bottom of the page? Great, Mitchell.
And they rushed him from the dungeon. All of this has been described by Solomon in Proverbs 30:32 with the words, "If you have suffered disgrace, you will be elevated." We find that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were similarly elevated after first having suffered disgrace. We find that Mordecai, after he had worn sackcloth and ashes to get the Jewish people to become penitent and to head off the evil decree of Haman, was subsequently elevated to be Persian king's first minister. Even Daniel, who was out of favor with King Darius, was thrown into a den of lions before being saved and subsequently raised to great influence at the court of said king. He had revealed the impending downfall of the Babylonian Empire to the Persians when he was able to decipher the meaning of the famous writing on the wall to King Belshazzar. Joseph's sudden elevation was similar and is described in Kohelet as from the prison house he emerged to reign. And in the words of our sages in Shemot Rabbah, the words which Pharaoh said worrying about a sudden rise to power by the Israelites were also inspired by the recollection of how a Jewish slave had suddenly risen to power in Egypt.
Great. Thank you. So what is the story that Bachia is trying to tell us? What is this sense?
From ashes to glory or greatness?
Yeah, from the depths to greatness, right? Again, written in here is a sense of hopefulness here. And he has Tanakh laid out in front of him, and so he's having all these other references that in the Tanakh, there are examples of people that were really downcast, and they rose to greatness. I had to be honest. I had to Google who Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were because Daniel I knew about, but these are Daniel's friends who are like side characters, and so I didn't quite remember that. But all of them, the four of them, were sent down. We think of Daniel in the lion's den and all of that. But they all rose back up into greatness in other ways. And then Bachia gives us other examples around Tanakh as well. Why do we think this is a recurring part of the conversation that we have?
It happens too frequently.
Say more.
It just, like, as the cycle we're in now, you have, people get to a point where they have to know there's hope, that there is going to be change. It's happened before, we just have to get through the cycle.
Yeah, Terry says that because there's a cycle of this, of despair and hope, whether it's today or back through all of these different parts of the conversation. It's a Jewish experience of the world over time that we are in this cycle, Terry says. John.
I'm trying to understand. I don't have a good way to put it or understand it.
Okay. I'll make you sound good.
You make you sound good. The disparity in duration. I have a sense from these passages that the time of being down, of being oppressed is long, and the redemption moment is very quick. And how does that affect our perception of our lives? Does it make people more patient? The nice view is it makes people able to be optimistic through long suffering. But on the other hand, it could be a very cynical imposition by the rabbis to try to make us feel hopeful even though things really suck. I don't quite know how to unpack it.
Yeah. So what John is saying is, what is the amount of time that we are in the upside compared to the downside? Because it feels like we're in the downside a lot longer, right? After all, we were in Egypt for 400 years before there was redemption, right? And it feels that we're in the down, the down part of the graph a lot longer than we're in the up part of the graph. I say that because John's a mathematician. So, and I would say that for the purposes of this, they're not talking about real history, right? Meaning about time according to your watch. That it's about the Jewish experience where it's sort of beyond time. There are up times and there are down times. And so whatever the real lifetime that we are living in right now, we don't know if it's going to be quick or if it's going to be centuries, but that we will get through this. And of course, when we get through this, it will change very dramatically, very quickly. That's the rushing part of it. There was a hand over here. Wait, Adam, 1, 2, 3.
I liken this to popular music when someone is described as an overnight sensation. And then you find out that they were playing in bars for 20 years.
Right, exactly. So
Sometimes it takes a long time for things to happen overnight.
yeah, Adam compares it to music. When all of a sudden you hear someone on the radio and they're a big hit, but what you don't see is that Springsteen was playing in Asbury Park for a long time before he, came out.
Southside John, no less.
So, right, exactly.
Yeah, that
Jerry?
kind of reiterating this point for the mathematicians, always said life is a sine wave.
Life is a sine wave, whatever that means. Right.
And this idea of sudden is exactly what Adam said. We think our perception is that it happened suddenly, but it took a long time.
Yeah.
And we don't realize it till the end, and that seems sudden, but it took a long time.
Right. There's a lot of preparation that goes into that final moment. Absolutely. Chazan.
I think there's a psychological element here too. If you tell somebody that it's going to take a long time for them to be redeemed, their kind of ability, their stamina falls. I think the person who is fighting a false judgment against them in jail has to believe that they're not going to be in jail for 30 years. Otherwise, like, their spirit could be crushed. I think it's a matter of faith to believe that overnight something could happen, like the Messiah could come, or I could be raised out of the pit. Like, these are matters for faith. It's only in retrospect we look back and say, of course it took 25 years for this to happen, and in the 25th year it feels like it all of a sudden happened. But it's a matter of telling ourselves.
Yeah, it's a matter of perspective. And when you are in the midst of despair, it's really hard to have perspective. That it's really hard to be able to understand that, when you were speaking, I thought of whoever it was that said that it takes 10,000 hours to master something, right? 10,000 hours, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, it only takes 10,000 hours? That's measurable. Like, I can understand that. Like, no, I'm only, 20 hours into 10,000. Wow, I got a lot more to go. But it's measurable compared to I'm a slave in Egypt and I don't know what the end date is, and it's going to take 400 years. Not knowing the end date of it is really, really hard. And frequently, actually, when I'm speaking with people and they're in a moment, or if you've talked to any teenager ever, right, they think everything is right now because they don't know what's next or have a perspective on it, that there are sine waves and ups and downs. Exactly. Sue?
Your voice and what you say matters just as much being in the pit as being outside. You still have a voice, and it still should be heard.
So you're taking us in a different direction. In the pit, you still have a voice, right? I think this was Rabbi Megdal's talk last week, where she talked about this idea of, her phrase was care being, but it was the idea that being in the pit, you're taking it in a slightly different direction. You still have agency. You still have control over what you do, that you have the ability to, even in moments of despair, to do something for yourself. They always say, if you're in a pit, stop digging. And maybe that's the most you can do on that day, is just stop digging on that day. Let's continue on, because I recognize the time, and we don't have to get to all of these. Consider it a gift. But the Zohar talks about our pasuk also. 13th century. Scholars say 13th century. The Zohar itself attributes itself to the 2nd century, but that's a different conversation. So similarly, Joseph was sad in mind and spirit. He was in prison. Maybe Sue was anticipating this. Once Pharaoh had sent for him, it is written, and they brought him hastily, which means that he appeased him and addressed him with joyful words that gladdened the heart. Why? Because he was dejected in the dungeon, in the pit. Come and behold, first he fell into a pit, and from the pit he later rose to greatness. Just this idea again of this cycle that we are in. Let's look at the haircut, and then I think we're going to wrap up because of time. Oh yeah, Sarah.
That one, yeah. Is that just emphasizing what they say here? Is that in English it all sounds the same, but the word in this pasuk is bor, and in other places when it refers to him being in prison, it doesn't use that word, the word that he was thrown into the pit by his brothers.
Yeah.
In English it says dungeon
it's the pit.
Specifically here says that he was thrown into a pit as opposed to mishmar or beit soar, which are other words that are used for the imprisonment. Here, it's from the pit to the pit, and emphasizing it with that Hebrew word.
Correct. Thank you for pointing that out. This is right. So the board that the Hebrew that is used here, right, is telling us that it is where else was he in the pit? When the brothers threw him into the pit. In other descriptions, it's uses other words to it, but here it seems like he's still there, which again, for the therapy inclined, that he's still in the pit that his brothers threw him in, no matter physically where he is gone. So absolutely. So for the haircut, because I alluded to this earlier, right? That in this one sentence, they pull him out, they give him a haircut, they clean him up, right? Because he's going to Pharaoh. So Rashi, 12th century France, Rashi explains that it was simply out of respect for the king. We take that, for Pharaoh, that we take that for granted, that is what you do. You wear something nice. You wear something nice when you go to something important. But what does Ibn Ezra say? Rashi was the beginning of the 12th century. Ibn Ezra is late 12th century. What does Ibn Ezra say? Who gave him the haircut? Someone else, right? So he clipped his own hair, Rashi says. Ibn Ezra said someone else gave it to him. So let's look at this super commentary on Ibn Ezra, which is a commentary on a commentary. Very Jewish. So, and here, this is, remember, the Torah doesn't have vowels. So here, there's an argument as to how should you vocalize it. And this is, again, before Nintendo and video games. Nintendo, I just dated myself. Before Atari, that this is what the rabbis were doing. They were playing with the vowels to see what it is. So someone want to read this one? Donna, did you raise your hand? I don't know. So our verse reads, Vayigalach. If Joseph shaved himself, Scripture would have used the heat palel. They're talking about the grammar here, okay? The heat palel rather than the PL. These are two different grammatical terms. This might cause you trauma of when you had to conjugate Hebrew verbs. I don't know, right? But heat palel compared to the PL. The meaning of which is that he shaved. However, this presents a problem because the subject of the sentence is missing. Right? Hence, Ibn Ezra notes that it should be rendered and someone shaved him. According to, my typo there, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Krinsky, Ibn Ezra is of the opinion that our verse is abridged and the reader has to supply the subject, right? That there's a mistake in here. It's shortened. Our verse should thus be rendered, and the shaver shaved him. So Ibn Ezra's note consists of one word, right? And there it is. If you look right above it, hamegaleh, right? That and he shaved. So Ibn Ezra is saying that actually the word is wrong. The Torah is wrong. Interesting, right? So and then why he changed his clothes, you can look at that as well. The idea is, though, is that sometimes the right answer is just to look into Torah, to look deeply into it. And especially now, what I found as I was just going around is that we too have high points and low points. There are moments of brightness, and maybe Hanukkah is a point of brightness, and there are moments of darkness. And that some of it's a matter of perspective. Right? And so let's bring a perspective that lifts us up, that brings us together. That is the world that we want, and that is the world that we need. Dr. Braunheim.
So, about the clothes. If you remember Joseph's son, he started at top. He went into the pit, and now he's back
Clothes.
He was wearing his coat of many colors.
Yeah.
And so for him, what he's wearing certainly signifies where he is.
Absolutely. The Joseph story is my favorite story. Like the whole story is my favorite in the entire Torah because we see him through so much of his life, almost all of his life. And so what Suzanne said is that it starts with clothing. His problems start with clothing. That was a high point, then led to a low point, and it's up and down. And he applies that to others as well. So like earlier in the Torah reading, what I was pointing to was that when his brothers were coming, he made sure that they got cleaned up. He made sure, right, the same things that happened to him earlier, he made sure that that happened later for them. And we see this repeat. Anna, last word.
Yeah, and it's not just that all these people like Joseph, they rose to greatness, like they rose to high positions, they just like get rich and have a great time. Also, if you go back to the Rabbi Nehemiah, he mentions like everything they were able to achieve. Like, for example, when Daniel was able to like reveal the impending downfall of the Babylonian Empire, they all like were in elevated positions where they were able to do good. It's not just that they were like having a great time, it was that they were able, like they came from a place of hopelessness, but then they were able to make it.
Yeah, they didn't just come back to neutral, right? Out of these experiences of despair, they didn't just come back to neutral, they excelled. They were able to impact others. And so my prayer as we wrap this up is that we will be able to excel as individuals and as a people as we have moments of darkness and we have moments of redemptive change as well. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.